In a time of misinformation, hidden agendas, and a decreasing moral code, isn't it about time we usher in a new paradigm? Join us as investigative journalist Anita Valentin takes you on a closer look at the stories that truly matter to you. Only on Real Revolution Radio X.
Hello and welcome to Real Radio Revolution's commentary series. I'm your host and producer, Anita Valentin, and on today's show, part 2 of Ivermectin, an off-label drug used to treat COVID-19 patients, not approved in the United States, but millions of people have taken it, not just for COVID-19, but for a number of conditions. It's used as an anti-parasitic, and we're doing a panel discussion today with patients and family members of patients, including attorneys that have represented families who have been in intensive care units and have been treated now with ivermectin and are doing much better. Attorney Ralph Lorigo is with us. John Minear, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your time. Natalie, welcome. Michael, Patrick. We're just going to talk and we'll go around the room just a little bit. And we'll actually start with Natalie and your story, Natalie, about your mom.
Okay. My mom, actually both of my parents contracted COVID-19 and were confirmed positive. My dad confirmed positive on January 3rd and my mom confirmed positive on January 7th. They were both very, very ill. It took everything out of them. They were started immediately on steroids and Z-Pak. I think it was January 12th. They had to call 911 because my mom was not able to breathe. My dad was recovering, but my mom really wasn't turning that corner. So when the ambulance came, they took her to the emergency room and she was for about 5 days, and she just wasn't doing well. She wasn't getting making the progress that they wanted to see, I guess. From the onset, I did ask, I had started to learn about ivermectin. I happened to put on Facebook that my mom was in the hospital with COVID. And a friend of mine saw that and sent me an article, which actually was, Michael, we haven't met yet, but it was your mom's article that I truly believe saved my mom's life. So thank you. I'm so grateful and happy to finally be able to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
But a family member of yours actually was on my friends list and passed me your mom's article. And I read about it and I found the FLCCC by reading your article. And it's also how I found Ralph and John. So I can't thank you enough for that, for sharing your story and being, I guess, the brave family that came first in Western New York.
Well, we're glad that things came together in a way that's hard, you can't really explain.
Absolutely. I think we all experienced that. Ivermectin, Ralph and John, and the power of prayer.
Absolutely.
Yes. So when my mom started going downhill, I started pressing more and more and researching more and more about ivermectin. And through the article that was on Michael's mom, I learned that it's really a benign medication. So there's nothing that could have hurt my mom for them to try this. And they kept saying no. They told me my mom wasn't a candidate. They told me that it would hurt her kidneys. They told me that it could shut down her liver. And I kept pushing back through my research and saying, I don't think that's the case. I really, I'm asking you, can you please try? And they would just say no. They did do the, you have to help me with the name of the medication, remdesivir. Is that how you say it?
Remdesivir. Yes.
Yes, they did give her that, but it didn't really work for her. She didn't make any progress because by that Saturday, she was needing to be put on a ventilator.
So
And
Natalie, just a quick question. So your mother wasn't, she wasn't responding to any of the approved treatments?
correct. They actually, where the hospital my mother was in was a hospital locally that was part of the clinical trials for the plasma antibody infusions, but they would not administer it to my mother. And, I'm sad to say that I had a staff member actually say to me that my mother was too old, that her age was a factor and it wasn't something they would consider doing for her at that time. And my mom, just to give you context, she just turned 65 in December. So my mom was vibrant and full of life. She was part of our day-to-day lives, very active in her grandchildren's lives, and had no pre-existing health conditions. So, my mom at this point had been 65 for maybe 3 weeks, I think, by the time she ended up in their ICU. And it was, at that point, I kind of knew that I wasn't going to get anywhere with the hospital. So that's when I decided to make the move to reach out to John and Ralph. And my family and I, talked at great length. We were very scared. We were scared what it could mean for, my mom and the care that she received if we were to bring a lawsuit against the hospital. That's always in the back of your mind. It was a very, very scary decision for us to make also because during this time of COVID, no one was allowed in the hospital. So my mom was there completely alone. At this point, she was incapacitated. They put her in a medically induced coma. She wasn't responding to any treatment. They were to the point where they actually were having to put her what they referred to as prone, where they put the patients on their stomach. And the theory there is that it gives maximum blood flow to the lungs. And sometimes it helps people turn the corner. And that did not work either. So, after a restless night's sleep of, thinking what are the pros and cons of taking the step, we decided that, my mom's life was worth the risk. And we reached out to Ralph and John, and they were our angels in disguise. They jumped immediately into action. John, I believe, stayed up all night that night preparing the work that we needed. And we were very, very fortunate with our primary care doctor. He actually knew about ivermectin. So when I had talked with Ralph and John the first day, they said, do you know if your primary care would be willing to back you up, and would you give the primary care, stats on ivermectin? And I said, well, I can certainly try. And I was so relieved to find out that I was one of the lucky few that had a doctor that knew about ivermectin and was actually using it. At that time, he had only been using it for about 2 weeks. And he had been prescribing it to elderly patients because he oversees nursing homes. And he was having success. So I didn't have to go very far into detail. I was frantic. I was scared that my mom was going to pass away. She was critically ill. And the hospital just said, there's nothing else we can do for her. And he said, I'm going to stop you right there. I know all about ivermectin. How can I help? And at that point, he gave me his cell phone number, and I gave it to Ralph and John, and they worked with my mother's primary care doctor and got the ivermectin. Our primary care doctor also called and spoke to the ICU attending at the hospital my mother was at. Well, he did not have rights to that hospital. He implored the attending to administer ivermectin. And they were very reluctant in pushing back. And thinking back, and John and Ralph, maybe your memory is a little more clear than mine, but I think that Dr. Medeski did convince the attending to give the first initial dose, but the condition was that Dr. Medeski took the liability and wrote the prescription. And then from there, my family and I had to go to a local Walgreens to pick up the medication and bring it into the hospital. My mother got her initial dose of ivermectin. She definitely started to turn the corner, but only 2 days later, I called to check on my mom, and her nurse mentioned to me that the medication had gone missing. So frantically, I had to call Ralph and John and ask them, what do we do? what are we going to do about this? Is Dr. Medeski even allowed to prescribe ivermectin again? I don't know if there's like any time requirements around certain medications and when they can be prescribed. So we had to get a second court order, and my family and I had to then get another prescription of ivermectin and bring it to the hospital for my mother to get a remaining 3 doses.
Mm-hmm. And Natalie, can you briefly go over what the hospital had told you about what might happen to your mom if they started using ivermectin?
Yes, they were, I would say they were intimidating. They told us things like, there's a possibility that if we do this, your mother's kidneys are going to fail. It could have impacts on her liver. And I would push back and say, well, I have found the FLCCC, and according to data that I found there and additional research that I have done, it appears that this medication is benign. I said, also, the reason I, started looking into ivermectin is because there was a woman, and my mother was in a hospital in Rochester. The other woman was, and Michael's mom was in Buffalo. And I said, just recently, I think within the last 2 weeks at that point, it had been that Michael had come forward with his family's story. And I said, they treated successfully an 80, I believe she was 80. And Michael, I'm sorry if I got that number wrong.
80.
She was 80 years old and had been on a ventilator for 3 days. They gave her ivermectin. And within 48 hours, that patient was off of the ventilator.
24 hours, actually.
It was 24 hours? Wow.
And 48 hours, she was out of the ICU.
Wow, that's amazing. My mom didn't respond as quickly, but I think it's because the fight dragged on for so long between the hospital and my family. And she got sicker and sicker. And I can safely tell you, just based off of the doctors actually called us in to say goodbye to my mom at one point. She was that sick. And they tried to say, like, scare us away from ivermectin, almost saying like, pretty much you could kill your mom if you move forward. And I just would say, I stand firm in the data that I have been able to find and the data that's right here on the FLCCC websites. There's many videos posted about it. It's completely benign, and I don't think it's going to harm my mother. Also, you told us there's nothing else you plan to do. At this point, it seemed like they were only giving hospice care to my mom. And if they're not trying anything, my family, when I say we, my family and I needed to know that we tried everything that was available to us. And ivermectin was something that looked promising, and we were willing to go all in, meaning when the doctor said to my father, this could potentially go the other way, my father was confident, knowing he had my sister and I and the rest of our family backing him, saying the science is what matters here. And we have to try this, and we're willing to take whatever risks you might think that there are, because we don't believe those risks are there and we want to try. And I thank God every day that we did that, because it saved my mom, that and the power of prayer.
And Natalie, after one dose was administered, you saw positive results in your mother's condition?
Immediately. Yeah, she came back from death's door. We didn't know, we thought we were going to lose her. She had gotten so sick and it had taken so long. I think at this point, when we finally got her ivermectin, she was ventilated almost 14 days, I think, at that point. And she'd been in the hospital prior. So what's that, 3 weeks my mom had been at this point, fighting back and forth about ivermectin, which, as you don't know what you're really getting into until you're in the position that you yourself have COVID or your loved one has it. And as you learn that there's this medication that is in fact FDA approved, it's benign, and it's actually, for whatever reason, curing these COVID patients, why do we have to now figure out alternate means to get this medication, and going as far as bringing a lawsuit? Mm-hmm. So it was very overwhelming. It was very intimidating. And that your loved one's life hangs in the balance.
How's your mom doing now, Natalie?
Amazing. She came home from rehab on March 22nd. And at that time she was on oxygen 24 hours a day and needed a walker and a wheelchair. And she now only needs oxygen at night, and very minimal. and she is walking with a cane, but my daughter did report to me. So she did get caught. She walked without her cane today, which I think is a wonderful sign, but she's making strides and so quickly too. I think that's another thing to comment on. And Michael, I don't know if you can speak to this at all with your mom, but she's like an anomaly to the rehab doctors. So they've seen, my mom was in a unit that was set up in Western New York solely because of COVID. We didn't have a local rehab for respiratory. And the doctors there were completely baffled once my mom got into rehab. She had the trach. She spent 2.5 weeks there, and she was jumping hurdles that should have taken her weeks and months. So they have no explanation why my mom has recovered so quickly. And the only difference between my mom and those other patients, because it was a 10-bed facility, was that my mom received ivermectin and those other patients did not.
And prior to being treated with ivermectin, your mom was actually being prepared for hospice care, yes?
Correct. They pretty much were giving her hospice care. They stopped everything. I remember vividly calling Ralph and John crying, saying, they're basically keeping my mom comfortable. She's sedated, and they're giving her hospice care and they should be fighting for her life. Why aren't they doing more? And, Ralph and John, I think you guys were just as surprised as we were going through it at the different things that happened. And I don't want to necessarily say I'm pointing fingers, but to a certain degree, I feel like once we had Ralph and John execute the court orders, we were very much so shut out in the hospital. And again, this was during a time where you couldn't be in the hospital. So we couldn't get anyone on the phone to speak with us, oftentimes to even get updates about my mom's care. And I will tell you that they had given my mom the ivermectin, and I believe it was that day or the next day, that night or the next evening after her first dose, we were called in to say goodbye. And the hospital didn't tell us my mom was awake. My mom had woken up out of a coma after receiving ivermectin, and the hospital never called us and shared that with us and allow us to drive 45 minutes to prepare ourselves for saying goodbye to my mom. And we got there and she was awake. And the hospital didn't tell us that. They let us come there to say goodbye. And they even said to us, we can't explain why your mom's awake right now.
And Attorney Lorigo and Attorney John Minear, how difficult has it been to work cases similar to Natalie, where there has to be actually a court order instituted? Is she one of the first cases? How many cases have you worked on where you've been successful in getting a court order to administer ivermectin to patients that are on ICU?
So Mike's mother was the first. So when Mike's mother came about, I didn't know anything about ivermectin. I didn't know anything about, what could save somebody from COVID. But I got a call from Mike's brother-in-law, who's been a long-term client of mine, saying, you've got to help my mother-in-law. And here's the situation. So we brought Mike and his sister in at 4:30 on a Thursday. John stood up till 11:30, 12 o'clock that night to prepare the papers. They came in at 8:30 in the morning. We filed the papers with the court. Now you have to serve a lawsuit. So we had to do what's called a declaratory judgment action. And you have to do an order to show cause on an immediate basis. We got in front of Judge Henry Nowak. So I've known him for a long time. He called me on my cell phone, and he was in the middle of hearings that day, but he called me on my cell phone, asked me what this is all about. I explained it to him. He agreed to sign it. Then I got a call from the attorney for the hospital and the healthcare system saying he doesn't have the right to do it. He can't prescribe medication. And so they fought back very, very hard. And what I was able to do was get the personal care physician for Judy, who really didn't know much about ivermectin, but he saw the transition when she got her first dose. And so he was willing. I got a letter out of him to prescribe the ivermectin. So we ended up having a second hearing at 5 o'clock that same Friday with the other lawyer on the phone, myself and the judge. We went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The other lawyer wanted to speak to the doctor. The doctor said, look, I don't have walking privileges. I don't go to the hospitals anymore because they said, okay, if you want to prescribe it, you administer it, and you take over the patient. And he said, I can't do that. So finally, I said to the judge, you're going to have to make a decision, Judge. This is a life or death situation. The doctor is willing to prescribe it. And the judge, to his credit, said, the doctor's willing to prescribe it. Mike, the other lawyer, you have to administer it. And that's what happened.
And then, Mike, can you speak to that in terms of your mom's specific case and your experience in trying to get your mother ivermectin?
Yeah, it happened just really fast, and as I said, it's hard to explain. These dominoes were just all falling at the right time, and it's hard to explain outside of faith and prayer. But Ralph called me on that Thursday afternoon. And I said, well, can't call him, write a letter? It's not. It's the only way to do it is you got to sue the hospital. And I said, okay. My sister and I jumped in a car and drove down to Ralph's office right after and just said, all right, let's go. We had seen the FLCCC and Dr. Corey and his testimony, his Senate testimony, and we were just sold. It actually came from my mother-in-law. She told my wife and said, you need to look into this. Michael's mom needs to be on this now. Saw it. And, sometimes it's difficult in those situations that someone's saying, oh yeah, take some vitamin D, take some of this and it'll work. And it was just, I decided to look at that and looked at the testimony, and I showed it to Ralph and John when we met in the office on Thursday afternoon. And he's just so believable, so compelling. And we're looking at all the evidence and saying, my mom is dying. It was terrible. And that's just in the same thing with Natalie said, they're in there alone. You can't go in a hospital. And the thought that my mother was in this room by herself and I just couldn't be in the room with her, things like that. So luckily, it's just the grace of God that Ralph and John were right there, put it together. And it just, things don't usually happen that fast and that quickly. So it came through, and we had the biggest surprise was the hospital fighting back. They had a court order compelling them to administer ivermectin, basically relinquishing them of any responsibility. And they didn't want to set a precedent of patients telling them how to take care of their patients. 80% of the people don't make it. Just basically, all right, what have you been doing for 10 months that it's not working? What you're doing isn't working. So it was really, it was a challenge, but we're just so grateful. And I just say it's just being stubborn and being, just stubborn going in. So yeah, let's get it done, push it. And I can't claim anything more than that. We're lucky to have Ralph and John.
There's no question Mike's really one of the heroes here. I would have never known about ivermectin if it wasn't for Mike. Mike brought me the information on ivermectin. He brought me the video of Dr. Corey testifying before the Senate. He convinced me from all the information that he had that ivermectin was worth the try. Risk versus reward, there was no question. His mother was told she had a 20% chance of living. And if she lived, she'd be on a ventilator for a month. We turned that around, as he said, in 24 hours. And she's the miraculous one. She got out of the hospital in another 5 days. She went to rehab. She was in my office. She's a beautiful woman. She really is the poster child for ivermectin.
We just went on a family vacation because we didn't get to share Christmas, and all of her grandchildren, my wife and I, my sister and her husband, were all down in Fort Myers Beach, and Mom was on the beach with us and there the whole week. And she was able to go home from rehab. But the rehab, 30 days in rehab, trying to learn how to walk and get strong again, and still gets tired, but she didn't have to have oxygen and she didn't need a walker. So that was really, I mean, just remarkable, and her strength and being able to recover. But it's really frustrating and infuriating if I allow myself to think about it, of why it had to get that way. Why did she have to spend 30 days in rehab? She had to recover from being in the hospital for 4 weeks.
Yeah, from laying in bed, right?
She got
How frustrating.
Yep, and she had, she developed, clots in her legs, and they went into her lungs. So she had to take some blood thinners to help try and break that up. And it's, COVID doesn't kill you. It's what COVID causes, that the pneumonia in your lungs, and you can't breathe. So we're just grateful that they need to be giving this to patients, and they should be giving it to every patient who tests positive, to keep them out of the hospital.
And so, Michael, what happens after you get the court order executed with Ralph and John, and now a doctor has to administer ivermectin to your mom? And what happens during that phase where your mom automatically within 24 hours becomes better, and now she's being treated with ivermectin? Did you have a dialogue with the physician, or Ralph and John? Did you have a dialogue with that physician that then began to administer it?
What happened was, the newspaper got a hold of the story. It was the number one story in the newspaper for 5 days running. It was the number one story. When Natalie came to me, I mean, we had to go get a second court order because they said they lost the ivermectin, and this hospital, Rochester General Hospital, couldn't get it. So we had to get a second court order over the weekend from Judge Frank Caruso. On a Saturday.
So when you say they lost it, the ivermectin just mysteriously got lost? The ivermectin suddenly disappeared?
Yes. I'm sorry. I just have to excuse myself for one moment. My allergies have decided to rear their heads, so I'm going to go grab a drink. I'm sorry, Anita.
So what happened was, Natalie calls me. I mean, we've had so many calls and texts. I feel so close to Natalie. Mm-hmm. Because it took just so long a period of time. It was so personal and so heartwarming to be able to help her mother. And we could see her mother gradually getting better and getting better and getting better. Mm-hmm. So look, there's 10 people in my law office. We've all prayed for these people. We all know this is a miraculous thing. Mm-hmm. We really can't understand the pushback from hospitals at this point. Mm-hmm. Yes. I have my own suppositions, but I just don't, I really don't get it.
Yes, the Frontline COVID-19 Critical Care Alliance that Dr. Pierre Corey and Dr. Merrick, along with a number of other physicians, leading international physicians, ICU specialists, pulmonary specialists, have now come together, knowing because they are on the front lines, and they have now collected meta-analysis data, and they really want to approve this for emergency usage. And there are people still continually dying. We're going to get way past 500,000 people dying from COVID-19. And in many countries, COVID-19 doesn't actually exist because they've been using ivermectin as a prophylactic to treat just in general. It's a preventative medicine in many of these countries. Some of them are now mandated to use ivermectin to treat COVID-19. And so we have this huge gap in between our political infrastructure. Big Pharma is a big part of this. Pat will speak a little bit to that on Big Pharma and how inexpensive. How much are we talking again for ivermectin?
Yeah, the copay on it was 83 cents for the entire dose that she needed to cure. So it was 20 tabs. And I also agree with what you're saying, Anita, because I was floored to find out that not only is my family going through, worrying whether or not my mother's going to survive, it felt almost like a surreal experience to know that I had to go to a local Walgreens to get a medication to save my mother's life and take it to the hospital. Like, how is that possible that a big hospital in our area wouldn't even have this in-house, because that's what the attending kept telling me when I would ask for it as well. Well, we don't even carry it here. I'm like, well, where can I go to get it? And I'm thinking, oh no, this is going to take forever. And then it was, 10 minutes away around the corner at Walgreens. I'm like, how does Walgreens have this medication, but not a huge hospital? It's unfathomable to me. Like, I don't understand it. And what I don't understand is that how much awareness there just isn't about ivermectin. I got lucky and saw, Michael's family's article, and had they not come forward, it really scares me to think about where my family and I would be and where my mother wouldn't be right now. Mm-hmm. I don't think my mom would have pulled through. And I don't know, how that would have impacted my family to know that there was a drug out there that is, again, FDA approved and could have saved my mom's life. It cost 83 cents. And, she would have passed away having this information. It would be very, very hard to process. How are we in the United States of America? And my mother, who was full of life and just retired, is no longer here because, big pharma couldn't make money off of us. So that's what my mom's life was worth, it almost feels like. And I can't imagine how many others are out there that don't know and how they feel to find out about it after the fact.
I was going to tell you that the remdesivir, they also gave that to my mother with no effect. And look at your mother's hospital bill and find out that it's a $3,000 dose of remdesivir that doesn't work, and $3,000 doses. And then, it's just coincidence, right? She now has to go to rehab, and Medicare pays for 30 days in rehab. She got out on day 30. So, everything is just, there's an arrogance, and there's also a problem in the healthcare with physicians. They don't have time they're not academics. They're treating patients. They don't look at, they don't read. There's only so many hours in a day, but then they don't trust someone like the frontline, Dr. Corey, Dr. Merrick. These they research, they study, they find this out, and they won't listen to it. There can't be anything else. And we were successful. I told Ralph, we were successful. And this is just being a bully, I guess, calling and talking to the attending physician, the ICU physician at night, and saying, I need my mom to get this. Either you approve it or tell me who I need to talk to, because this is what she's going to get. And he listened. He got off the phone and called and gave my mother one. He agreed for one dose. He had to have it brought in from Buffalo General, another hospital. Took a few hours. They weren't going to give any more, because once they took my mom out of the ICU, it was a different doctor group. There was a different medical group on the step down floor. They wouldn't do it, and they said, we're not going to experiment on patients. Mm-hmm. And that's when we had to get Ralph and John involved too, because they took her out of the ICU. It's a remarkable turnaround. She goes in a step down floor, and she's kind of doing worse. Like she's just still really ill. And then we wanted more doses, and they wouldn't. And then even finding out that they're, Dr. Corey's in their research there is high dose corticosteroids. They're giving amounts that they need to be 10 times what they're giving. So they're not even really treating the patient with the highest efficacy. And
those are patients with severe side effects. And we're looking at ivermectin that has minimal to no side effects. This is a prophylactic used just as a preventative. And Ralph and John, it seems like you two are just helping to save lives. Both Michael and Natalie look like they could have lost their parents had they not been treated with ivermectin.
So to answer your other question, we have 2 court orders additional to these 2. So we had an 81-year-old patient, John, who was also in the same medical group, a different hospital than Natalie's mother, but in the same medical group, United Memorial Medical Center in Batavia, New York. And so he's 81 years old. He's there since March 19th. And they absolutely refuse, even though we won this court order against the medical group before, they absolutely refuse. So on Good Friday, I call the judge. This is the Honorable Frederick Marshall at this point. I call him at home. I have his cell phone number. And he wants me to get the attorney on the other line. Now, she's on vacation. She's in a hotel room, but she's good enough to get on the line. And she argues on behalf of the hospital. She says all the things that Natalie has said. It'll affect her liver. It'll do this. It won't help. It's not approved. The judge says, Ralph, you've got, the wife is the healthcare proxy, right? Yep. Yes, Judge. And she wants it, right? Yes, Judge. Nicole, you have to give it to her. So he prescribed it. Mm-hmm. Now, we had the same kind of problems Natalie had with the hospital. This 78-year-old wife would call ICU every day. They'd put her on hold. They'd disconnect her. They'd tell her the doctor would call her and never did. At one point, they said you could come and see him tomorrow. She went there and they said, you have to wait in the lobby. Then they said, you have to go home. So I had to go a second time to the judge. And this turned out by agreement, but we had a second conference with the court where the hospital agreed every day she could visit her husband and they would give me all of his medical reports. They actually sent me 1,781 pages of the man's medical reports. That man's off the ventilator, out of ICU, in rehab today. That's that case. We have another case in Nassau, downstate, with a woman named Deborah, who's only 52. She's only 52. And this is Mount Sinai Hospital. And this is interesting because there's an infectious disease doctor at Mount Sinai who was willing to prescribe it. He went to the administrator who said no. So we tried to get the affidavit out of the doctor. He was hesitant. Mm-hmm. And then John was smart enough to find the portal. So we went to the patient portal. The husband went to the patient portal, saw the prescription, and we were able to put that in our affidavit. And a judge in Nassau signed to give her the ivermectin. And now she's had a couple of doses. She's stable and moving up. We have a couple of other cases. One we're doing right now in Illinois, one in Pennsylvania. I mean, people have called me. I have hundreds of emails since this started only a few months ago. Mm-hmm. Some of them we were able to help without litigation, but too late sometimes. So I have this email from this guy in California, and here's how terrible this email is. So he says, hello, Mr. Lorigo. My wife is still in the fight. Below are the recent events. On January 22nd, early morning, I get a call from the doctor at the hospital. Gayla is declining rapidly. Okay to come in and say goodbye. Up until now, we've not been able to go to the hospital. On the way driving to the hospital, I get a call from the doctor saying the hospital has approved the ivermectin because we've been working through doctors there. January 22nd, 23rd, we stay at Gayla's side and watch her vitals worsen and worsen. Hospital is telling us they can't get ivermectin until the next day, January 23rd. Stay all night at the hospital by her side. Gayla does not give up. Next day, January 23rd. All day we watch Gayla worsen. Nothing we do except keep praying for miracles. About 11 a.m., ivermectin arrives. And they give her the first of what is going to be 4 doses. Stay by her waist, her side, watching her get worse. Then her vitals turn better, and they tell him he has to go home. The problem is, this is weeks she's been on the ventilator. After her second dose, he sends me a letter. She passed. I greatly appreciate everything you did. I just wish I would have gotten to you sooner. Mm-hmm. These are the terrible circumstances. We were successful in these. Mm-hmm. This is the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm. And Ralph and John, how long does it take to get a court order? What is the actual process in between a client contacting you that their loved one is on the verge of death They've done research. They've heard about the FLCCC. They know there's a remedy to COVID-19. And so what does that legal process look like on your end, and how long will that take?
So in terms of a time period, that's what everyone asks when they call. They always want to know, how long is this going to take? Is this going to be weeks? Because here people think lawsuits, months, years, decades even. So in our case, in the first of our 5 cases, we were able to obtain a court order very quickly, probably within 5 hours was the first one, very quickly, days, very, very quickly. In terms of out of state, it takes longer. We need local counsel in various states. We're not admitted to practice all over the country. We're only admitted to practice in New York. I'm admitted to practice in Florida, but that doesn't help if you're in Arkansas or California. So we need local counsel there. There's different rules and things that we need to follow in terms of giving notice to the other side. That takes longer. So obtaining a court order, depending on the state, it could take days, maybe even a week tops. So it's always difficult to tell. But again, where we are here, we're able to obtain orders within hours.
One of the things you need to tell your people, in order to have standing to bring a lawsuit, because the petitioner is in ICU. So in order to have standing, somebody needs to be the spouse, if a judge will accept that, or better yet, a power of attorney. People need to get powers of attorney, a very simple form. They need to get it. It enables them to bring a lawsuit on behalf of their loved one. That's very important. In 2 other situations, we had to go get a guardianship before the judge would listen to the ivermectin argument. And while we're getting the guardianship, in one case, the person died. The judge has a schedule for the next day. The person dies because they wanted the guardianship.
So moral of the story, have a power of attorney in place so that you don't have to waste any time in obtaining a guardianship because you need standing. As Ralph stated, the person who actually has the claim is the one sitting incapacitated in a hospital bed. They can't say, write, or do anything. So somebody, family member, has to bring this suit on their behalf. And in order to do that, you have to have a power of attorney. That's necessary. We were able to squeak by a couple with a healthcare proxy, even though that's not the ideal standard. That's not even legally permitted, but we were able to do it in a couple cases. So again, power of attorney is key. If you don't have a power of attorney or even a healthcare proxy, you may have to go this guardianship route, which is valuable time that everyone really needs. So.
One thing that's been helpful is I'm a lawyer now for 47 years. So we're litigators. Our law firm does a lot of litigation. That means, we're in front of these courts on a regular basis. And that's been helpful to us in the local situations.
Let me just add on this is in what you're saying, Ralph, we've seen through this, and Natalie, I'm not sure what you've seen, and we're going to talk to Patrick, but we've had, there was a case of a family from, I think it was Mount Sinai Hospital. Their mom was in there, young, vibrant woman, and they called us, and we were praying with them on the phone, and they were trying, and I'm not sure what the circumstances were, but after a long fight without ivermectin, their mom passed.
Well, we actually brought the lawsuit. That's the one John's talking about, where you had to serve the hospital a day before. They waited, very late in the game. You had to serve the hospital the day before. The day we're finally able to talk to the court, she passed.
And
I think that's important too, is you should have co-power of attorney or co-healthcare proxy, because my father had healthcare proxy over my mom, but he was still very ill with COVID. And one of the side effects of COVID, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is that brain fog. And my dad was very, very overwhelmed. He was reeling from having COVID himself. So he had verbally told the hospital staff that he wanted me to speak for him, and any final decision would go through him, but he needed my help breaking down the information. information because he was just so sick and it was too much for him. And the hospital fought. Once we got Ralph and John involved, the hospital completely cut off all communication. They revoked my father's verbal requests. They would no longer even speak to me. My dad, when he would call in, the attending actually said to my father, "Who is Natalie and why is she calling here asking so many questions?" And the reason that I was asking questions is because I educated myself, as I think anyone in this position would do. And Mike, I'm not sure if your family did this, but I would like to think so, since you opened the floodgates for us here, is you begin to research, you keep track of the things that they tell you, you write them down. So if somebody says to you, your mother's white blood cell count was really, really high, and you ask what that number is, the next day, logically, you're going to ask what that number is because you know how critically ill your loved one is. They don't like that. When I started asking the nurses that were administering the medication to my mom, these nurses who are in the COVID units have no idea what ivermectin is or what it does, or why they're giving it to their patients. I can't tell you how many times I've talked with different nurses. They had no clue. And then I would tell them and explain to them what ivermectin was, and they were like mind blown.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I've been successful in helping friends. I tell everyone that I know personally, just say, hey, listen, if you know anyone, it's not real until it hits close to home. Now, Ralph and John are real close to my brother-in-law for 30 plus years. When it hits close to home, then you're in a scramble. So, but I've been able to help three different people that heard about it, either through my brother-in-law, one of the guys in a men's group of mine, his mom, and they didn't end up going to the hospital. As soon as they contracted it, we were able to go out. You can go out. Ivermectin is not a controlled substance. You can get that with a virtual health consult online. And my suggestion is if you test positive, give it to your loved ones right away. Don't take a chance because they go down fast.
The problem is, though, Mike, I experienced within my own family, shortly after my mother had gone into rehab, my cousin, who is year younger than me, just because we're very, very close, and she ended up getting COVID, and I knew everything that she needed to do through the experience with my mom, and her primary care doctor said, no, I will only give you ivermectin if for some reason you end up in the ICU. So my cousin did recover from it, but she has lingering effects. And I think, Pat, you can kind of speak to those as well. If I recall correctly, she thought that she came down with COVID again about 2 weeks after she recovered because she got so sick once again. And the brain fog that she's experiencing is very challenging. So I think that the point that you made, Mike, is the telemedicine videos, video chats. That's how people in my area are also getting it. There was 2 other families that I was able to help, and their primary care doctor refused to prescribe the ivermectin. So they did the telemed visits, and those physicians gave them the ivermectin, and they recovered. One gentleman was the pastor took it within 24 hours of testing positive and was fine. Had like no other additional symptoms. They didn't progress. His wife had a little bit of a bumpier path, but she recovered fully as well. And then there was another family from his church that he was able to pass along the information to. And then that family is how I was introduced to John's wife, which I ultimately referred to Ralph and John to help, because the hospital was, again, her husband was 81 years old, and they were giving him hospice care. They weren't going to do anything. They were giving him fluids at one point and keeping him sedated. That was it. So I think, it's a kind of a chain reaction in the terms of the people that you can help. And there's another family just recently that they are a family that live in Illinois, and it's a mother and daughter, and the mother is 68. The daughter is Ralph had mentioned before, she's very scared because English is not her first language either. She is from Albania. And right now, the hospital there is using scare tactics on her. They're intimidating her. They are trying to tell her that she's spending all kinds of money, and the hospital is going to win ultimately because they can outlast her in court because they have attorneys, and she's going to pay all this money and lose anyway. So they're trying to convince her not to go through with it at this point, which is, it's so scary. And I just keep telling her, stay the course. Unfortunately, once you involve the attorneys, the hospitals become very intimidating. I also had personal experience with that intimidation. I will tell you that not only did they lose my mom's medication, but when my mom was very, very ill, still recovering, they gave my mother a medication that she was horribly allergic to. She ended up contracting a urinary tract infection. And we told every nurse or doctor my father and I spoke with that my mother was allergic to any Cipro drug or sulfa drug and not to give it. And they treated her with one and basically gave her the equivalent to an anaphylactic reaction. She had hives all over her body. Now her body's stressed. It's been fighting at this point, probably, I think it was 6 weeks in, that she was battling and trying to recover. And how does the hospital make a mistake like that and give her, it gave us pause. Like, is this part of the retaliation? They lost my mom at one point in the ICU. They couldn't tell me where my mom was. John had the pleasure of being on the phone with me when I was trying to find her because I had him on speakerphone because I could not believe the lengths of what felt like retaliation that the hospital was going to shut my family out, and the dark days that we had because much like what Ralph had mentioned with John's wife in Batavia, I have all of the phone records. They would put us on hold for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, say someone was coming, no one would pick up, we would get disconnected, no one would call us back. Just the mental anguish that they put my family through unnecessarily, all because they don't agree with the giving ivermectin to treat COVID, but it worked. So how do they refute that? I mean, it happened in front of them.
No,
So
there's no
it's just scary.
incentive, right? There's no incentive because it's so inexpensive. They don't make any money off of it. And
it's so true.
And, I got COVID back in March of 2020. And I didn't recover as quick. It took me about 2 weeks where I couldn't really do anything. Luckily, I was not bad enough to have to go to the hospital, and had fatigue and malaise. I just didn't care. I was exhausted. There was a tightness in my chest, and there was some difficulty breathing at times. And 2 weeks later, I'm able to work half days and then feel better after 4 weeks. And I'm a recreational athlete and do a lot of cycling of late, and got back and got on the bike and was trying to catch up with my friends that I ride with, and did quite a bit of riding the next 4 weeks. And then without warning, it came back. And I knew kind of when I was riding and pushing myself a bit to increase my fitness, the tightness in my chest hadn't totally gone away. And then without warning, the fatigue hit again back, I guess it was like about April 16th in 2020. And then I was long hauling on and off with fatigue, just kind of exhausted, low energy, terrible attitude. I'd have very short patience, difficulty working. And so I was writing about this, and that's how I know Anita from, we've been in a mutual writing group in the past. And I was blogging about this when I could, and wrote finally a blog actually in Fort Myers. I was down there hoping some warm weather would do it. So connecting to you again, Michael, being down there, and I posted my third blog, and a friend of a friend said, "Oh, how about ivermectin? Have you tried that?" Mm-hmm. And so I researched it, and I realized too that the medical establishment was going to be so resistant on this. And I'm horrified by your stories about how defensive and closed-minded the hospitals have been to your parents of trying to get get them ivermectin. So I looked at it and I thought, well, I have little or nothing to lose. At worst, I might get some diarrhea, but that was better than long hauling, which I had been doing for the last 9 or 10 months. And so I did an online order of it, and within about 3 weeks, it showed up on my doorstep when I got home. And then I started taking it based on the research protocols that have been posted by that time. And I haven't totally gotten rid of it, but it's made a huge difference in my ability to function. I could now work full days again, and not spend the weekends basically in bed recovering from the week. I can basically do most anything now. I'm not back to exercising yet, so I don't think the ivermectin will totally eliminate COVID. Your own immune system has to kind of finally defeat it. And so now we're looking at talking with actually Anita connected with Dr. Corey at the FLCCC Alliance, and we're next week probably going to take a look at, okay, what if we add in some kind of a steroid or some other treatment in addition to this to finally kick it out of my system entirely, and maybe I can go back to my normal life of being much more active and still be able to do full days of work and all that. So it's crazy when I see how effective ivermectin is and doing all the research. I felt comfortable enough to basically treat myself, at least for the first several weeks, or actually it was a couple months actually, because I took it in a couple doses, and the first round made a huge difference, and then it's been incremental since then. So I can't say enough good things about ivermectin, and I think my friends probably get tired of me talking about it if I do, but it's an amazing story that big pharma and big healthcare has no incentive to get behind. And I think it's also a fear that the emergency approval for the vaccines, which is all anybody wants to talk about, is given as long as there's no feasible alternative. And so part of the problem is I think that language sets it up where the healthcare and health officials can't take a two-pronged or multi-pronged approach to treating patients and try various different approaches, because we've invested so many billions and probably trillions into vaccines that now if you look at the efficacy of ivermectin, that's a complete threat, because the levels of 70s and higher percentages potentially of effectiveness to help patients rebound is equal or better than a lot of the vaccines. So that's, I think, a real problem. Either the language needs to be rewritten, or we also have the problem with our fee-for-service healthcare, and I won't get into that whole soapbox.
Well, and the challenge with that, Patrick, is the fact that the U.S. government billions to that industry to develop the vaccine,
right?
And they're also now buying they paid the pharma companies to develop a vaccine. Now they're actually paying for the vaccine that they paid to have developed in the first place to give it out to everybody. And it's just challenging. And you know what? It's not a Republican or a Democrat thing. No. And it's because pharma gives a lot of money to everybody. I'm in Florida and have some conservative and very red, folks down here. And it's all, they know about it, but no one's saying anything. Why wouldn't you, if you wanted to make a difference, try calling your local politician, your local congressman? They don't want to touch it. No one wants to touch it. So it's all entangled. And what you said is that they'd have to admit that maybe they overlooked something. And wow, we spent billions on this and all these people died, and we had a simple cure that could have saved 95% of them. I don't know.
I think getting the word out about ivermectin has been challenging because I believe it's being, filtered through the media to a certain extent, because when I did reach out, when I was having all these issues with Rochester General, I reached out to my local assemblyman to ask for, support and see what his thoughts were. And he was just as mind blown as I was. And we had actually a very great conversation, because he said he had no idea, and he definitely wanted to start researching ivermectin because of some of the issues that we've seen all around the country in nursing homes at that point. But he recommended, why don't you share your story? More people need to know. Go to your local news channels. And I will tell you that none of them wanted to carry the story. They mentioned ivermectin, a few of them, that, the court order was one. But that's really all that was said. And when you speak with some of the reporters and you tell them what your family is experiencing and the things that have been done because you had to retain an attorney, none of those things are talked about. I think also the things that's not being talked about is that while I am very grateful for our frontline responders, the doctors, the nurses, the ambulance workers, all of them, very thankful for them. And I'm not trying to depreciate them or diminish them in any way, but this has been going on for, well, it's been over a year now. They're burnt out, they're tired, and their bedside demeanor is not what you would hope that it would be when your loved one is on death's door. I was not met with kind hearts. I was not met with a gentle speaking doctor. I was shut out. My family was shut out. They wouldn't talk to us. And I think that's not talked about either, that the fatigue and the burnout and probably all of the loss that they have seen while fighting COVID, in tandem with, you can't acknowledge ivermectin or there could be retaliation for their own careers, right? If you think about this on a bigger scale, right. And what you're up against. So, I think that even getting the information out to the general public and saying, hey guys, you should definitely do your own research on ivermectin has been challenging for that reason.
Well, and the doctors
don't want to.
And the doctors are kind of beholden to the administration of whatever hospital they work for or medical group. But ivermectin, NIH did change after, on January 15th, they changed the ruling from against ivermectin to be used for treatment of COVID from a against to a neutral. So it's an off-label prescription, which I think I understand about 25 to 30% of all drugs are often prescribed that way.
Yes.
And so doctors are free to prescribe this for COVID. There's nothing that they're under, any liability then because NIH has given that neutral rating. But there's not a lot of incentive, and we've been so vested in the vaccine. And how do you, as a medical, authority, we hesitate to do any kind of nuanced explanation of where we are and what's going on because we've had this also political situation where we're very black and white. And so giving a more nuanced and letting the science speak is very hard to get that communicated to the larger audience. And so that's also been a problem. So you get all these factors that really make it tough for ivermectin to get some traction. It's really frustrating.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that information can be found on the FLCCC's website because they've done their own independent studies. And these are some of the top leading physicians in the world. Their peer review together alone is within thousands and thousands of papers that they've all written cohesively. And so what we're looking at too is just there's a gap in between not only the media and getting the correct information out there. Pat and I talk about this in terms of these very small baseline articles that come out and they're shutting down ivermectin. And it's either, they love to sensationalize something. Recently, we just talked about one of the print papers here in the city of Chicago saying, could a head lice treatment really work for COVID-19? And so we've got to really, really be really careful with the languaging of what we're doing. These are investigative reporting stories. A story like this needs investigative reporting. This is a very in-depth topic. It's a medical topic, and we have people who are dying daily, and we have something available that can assist them. And what we're doing is we're just starting to gather testimonies of patients and their families, attorneys like Ralph and John who are helping to save lives. And this is a common, Pat's a bit of a Renaissance man, right? So he avoided going to the hospital. He avoided going to the hospital. Don't let him tell you that he didn't need to. He avoided it. He knew he wasn't going to get any sleep. He knew he needed real rest. And he decided to go, you're getting your shipment independently online.
Without a prescription, and it ships from Germany. Now the problem is it takes a while to ship, but it's very inexpensive. You know, I got 30 tablets, 6 milligram for like $26. Now, I've talked with my primary care physician, which I changed after having trouble with my initial physician, and educated her on it. And so in the meantime, waiting for another shipment, she's prescribed it for me. But when I went to pick it up at Walgreens, like 30 pills for only 3 milligram were like $100. Now, I figured out later, going to GoodRx, I could get a coupon and discount it to about $36. So it's kind of ridiculous that it seems as though also the price of ivermectin's been raised here in the United States as an additional resistance to, you know, the fact that we've got this very inexpensive drug that's normally, you know, less than $1 a pill, and you know, it can be so effective on critical care, on early or when you early onset, and then also it's significant help for long haulers too. So it's crazy that it's a drug that was developed in the 1970s, and actually the scientists themselves, the 3 scientists received a Nobel Prize in 2015 for that work, and the WHO calls it one of like the essential drugs to have, because it's an anti-parasitic. So yeah, it treats scabies, it treats river blindness, and so then these third world countries or less developed countries, their doctors may be more familiar with using it and its efficacy, and how it really, there's not much that it can do to you. And I've taken high doses of it, and it make me a little tired, and once or twice I got some diarrhea, but I'd rather have had that than to keep suffering for months and months at a time with no answers from the medical establishment as to what I could do to get better. And I contacted a couple of the new long COVID clinics that have been set up at some of the couple local universities here in Chicago, and you know, they didn't really have any solutions when I asked them, you know, are you using ivermectin? What are you doing? And it seems to be more like a money grab, in that it's fee for service, and they want to have me come in. Or if they did, I couldn't get in till, when I called in January, until April for an appointment. So it just makes all kinds of sense. And when you dig into the data further, where in other countries it's become over-the-counter use and their numbers just plummet if there's regular use and the ability for people to use it either by prescription, the doctors encourage it, or just over the counter, it's a really quite safe drug. There's no known situation where anybody's ever OD'd on it, and there's only a couple cases where it might have caused some liver damage, but in those studies there was complications that the patient already had, some ongoing issues. So it's unclear that ivermectin was the cause, and most likely it wasn't. And that's after billions of doses that have been administered. I think around 4 billion or more.
Close to 4 billion. And normally medications don't win the Nobel Peace Prize. So we know that level of efficacy was something they'd never seen before.
Right.
Again, used globally throughout the world. Some countries are now mandated to use it to treat COVID-19. And I wanted to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to hear your stories, to document your stories. This is Real Radio Revolution's commentary series. Thank you so much, Attorney Lorigo, Attorney John Minear, Natalie, Michael, Patrick, thank you so much. And we'll see you soon.
But heard instead. Dear listeners, through podcast radio on realrevolutionradio.com. Never before has inspirational podcast radio been taken to this next level of wow. Until now. Today, in the age of information, more and more people are searching for answers and in solutions and how to better approach and perceive every day-to-day concerns by tuning in to realrevolutionradio.com. Isn't it about time we take back our lives, back in consciousness, in a higher state of awareness, in the evolution of our own state of higher well-being? Yes, we can do so consciously every day by tuning in to the many groundbreaking and third eye-opening podcasts. Our new Cleveland-based network of over 33 paradigm-shifting internet talk shows. Only on realrevolutionradio.com. Be part of that change. Evolve. Be inspired.